They called me the spare daughter, the one who didn't matter. And honestly, I was fine with that arrangement until my entire family ended up dead and I became the only thing standing between two kingdoms and a war that would have made the history books for all the wrong reasons. But let me back up, because this whole mess started 6 months ago when I was still just Lyra Ashworth, the disappointing second daughter who spent more time reading about foreign trade agreements than learning how to curtsy properly. My half sister Celeste was the golden child, beautiful, refined, and absolutely convinced she was destined to marry Crown Prince Adrian and become queen. Meanwhile, I was the insurance policy, the backup daughter they'd eventually marry off to some minor lord to secure a grain shipment deal or something equally romantic. The plan was simple. Celeste catches the prince's eye, I get shuffled off to whoever needs a political alliance, and House Ashworth climbs the social ladder. Too bad nobody asked me what I thought about that plan, or what I knew about the prince, or the fact that Celeste had a talent for poison that would have impressed a professional assassin. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me start with the day everything changed. The day I convinced my father to let me join a diplomatic mission that was supposed to save us from war and ended up saving me from a life I never wanted. Absolutely not, my father said without even looking up from his correspondence. Diplomatic missions are for men, Lyra, and competent ones at that. I stood in his study, clutching a leather portfolio filled with every piece of intelligence I'd gathered about the Duchy of Morwen over the past 3 years. Father, with respect, half the men you're sending don't know a trade tariff from a dinner menu. That's what advisors are for. I am an advisor, or I could be. I slammed the portfolio down on his desk, finally getting his attention. Tell me, what's the current exchange rate between Valerian gold and Morwen silver? He blinked. That's not 3 to 1, but it fluctuates based on their mining output, which has been down 12% since Duke Aldrich's brother started stirring up trouble in the eastern provinces. I flipped open the portfolio to a map I'd annotated myself. And speaking of his brother, Lord Marcus, did you know he's been meeting with mercenary companies? Because I do. I also know he's been spreading rumors that Duke Aldrich is too weak to handle the mining disputes with us, and that maybe it's time for stronger leadership. My father's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. How do you know all this? Because while Celeste was learning 17 different ways to arrange flowers, I was actually talking to the Morwen trade delegations when they visited. Turns out, diplomats love to gossip when you bring them good wine and ask intelligent questions. Lyra, this isn't about mining rights, Father. This is about a succession crisis. Lord Marcus wants a war with us because it'll give him an excuse to declare martial law and remove his brother from power. If we go in there swinging our swords and making demands, we're playing right into his hands. For a moment, the only sound was the scratch of his quill as my father set down his pen and really looked at me for what felt like the first time in years. And what would you suggest we do instead? Expose him. Unite with Duke Aldrich against the real threat. Turn this from a two-kingdom conflict into an internal Morwen problem that we help solve. I pulled out another document. I've already drafted a preliminary proposal for a 3-way mining agreement that gives everyone what they actually need instead of what they think they want. My father stared at the document, then at me. How long have you been working on this? Since the tension started, 3 months ago. And you didn't think to mention any of this before now? I shrugged. You didn't ask. You were too busy planning Celeste's debut wardrobe for when Prince Adrian gets back from the mission. About that. My father looked uncomfortable. The prince specifically requested to lead this delegation himself. My stomach dropped. Adrian's going, but he's a warrior, not a diplomat. Yes, I'm aware. Father rubbed his temples. The king thinks it'll be good experience for him. Build character. It'll build his funeral pyre if he goes in there unprepared. I leaned forward. Father, please, I can help. I know I can. There was a long pause. Finally, my father sighed. One condition. You go as an observer only. No speaking unless spoken to. No offering advice unless asked. And absolutely no making friends with foreign dignitaries. I grinned. Of course not, Father. I'm a perfect lady. He snorted. Since when? Since never, but I'll fake it really well. 3 days later, I was packed and ready to leave for what would either be the adventure of a lifetime or a diplomatic disaster that would make the history books? Probably both. Prince Adrian was even more gorgeous in person than the court painters had managed to capture, which was really inconvenient considering I was supposed to be invisible on this trip. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of jawline that could cut glass and shoulders that filled out his traveling clothes in a way that made concentrating on diplomatic strategy unnecessarily difficult. He was also, within the first 5 minutes of our introduction, completely out of his depth. "Lady Lyra," he said, bowing perfectly as our carriage rolled toward the Morwen border. "Your father mentioned you have an interest in foreign affairs." "Something like that, Your Highness." "Please, call me Adrian. We'll be traveling together for the next week." He smiled, and I understood why half the court ladies wrote poetry about his eyes. I have to admit, I'm grateful to have someone along who might actually know what we're walking into. Lord Garrett, my father's lead diplomat, cleared his throat pointedly. "Your Highness, Lady Lyra is here as an observer. I'll be handling all negotiations and—" "Of course," Adrian said smoothly. "But surely there's no harm in getting her perspective on the cultural aspects? I'd hate to accidentally insult our hosts." I bit back a smile. Either the prince was more politically savvy than I'd given him credit for, or he was genuinely worried about screwing this up. Either way, I liked him already. "Well," I said carefully, "you might want to avoid the red wine at dinner tonight." "Why?" "Because in Morwen culture, red wine is only served at funerals and executions. If they offer it to us, they're making a statement about how they view these negotiations." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "And if they do offer it, politely decline and ask for their local ale instead. It shows you respect their traditions without accepting the insult." "See?" Adrian turned to Lord Garrett. "Exactly the kind of insight we need." Lord Garrett looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he nodded. "Very well, Your Highness." The Morwen court, as it turned out, was a den of vipers wrapped in silk and speaking in flowery metaphors that meant absolutely nothing. Within an hour of our arrival, I could see Adrian struggling to keep up with the verbal sparring that passed for polite conversation here. "Your Highness honors us with his presence," Duke Aldrich said as we were seated for the welcoming feast, "though we confess ourselves surprised that one so young was chosen to represent King Edmund's interests." The insult was so politely delivered that it took Adrian a beat too long to recognize it. His jaw tightened, and I could see him preparing to say something that would probably start a war. I kicked him under the table. He shot me a look, and I gave the tiniest shake of my head before leaning forward slightly. "Duke Aldrich," Adrian said smoothly, "you're absolutely right. I am young. But my father believes that sometimes fresh eyes can see solutions that experience might overlook." He raised his cup. "To new perspectives and old friendships." It was a perfect recovery, acknowledging the slight without taking offense, while subtly implying that the Duke's experience might be part of the problem. Duke Aldrich's smile became slightly more genuine. "Indeed, Your Highness, to new perspectives." The evening continued in much the same way, with Adrian navigating increasingly complex conversational traps while I provided subtle guidance. By the time we retired to our chambers, he looked exhausted. "Thank you," he said quietly as we walked down the corridor. "I would have started a war before the soup course without your help." "You're welcome, though technically I'm just supposed to observe." "Right, well, I officially request your advice. As Prince to advisor." I raised an eyebrow. "Advisor? What would you prefer? Court genius? Master of foreign intrigue? Lady of making sure I don't accidentally declare war at dinner?" I laughed despite myself. "Advisor works fine." "Good." He stopped outside my door. "So, Advisor Lyra, what's tomorrow's battle plan?" "Tomorrow, we find out whether Duke Aldrich is really the problem, or if someone's been whispering poison in his ear." I met his eyes. "And Adrian? That red wine thing? They served it with dessert. We're walking into a trap." His expression grew serious. "What kind of trap?" "The kind where they want us to fail. The question is whether it's the Duke who wants that, or someone else entirely." The next morning brought an interesting development, an invitation to tour the Morwen mines with Lord Marcus, Duke Aldrich's younger brother, the same Lord Marcus who'd been meeting with mercenaries and stirring up trouble. "How thoughtful," I murmured to Adrian as we prepared for the journey. He wants to show us exactly what we're fighting over. You think it's significant? I think Lord Marcus wants us to see something specific. The question is what? The mines were impressive, I'll give them that. Vast underground networks that produce some of the finest silver in the known world. But what caught my attention wasn't the glittering ore veins, it was the guards. There were a lot of them, and they didn't look like miners. Magnificent, isn't it? Lord Marcus said, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. These mines have supported Morwen for 3 generations. It would be tragic if anything were to happen to them. The threat was barely veiled. Adrian's hand instinctively moved toward his sword, but I caught his wrist. Indeed, I said before he could speak. Such beautiful workmanship. These support beams, for instance. I gestured to the wooden structures holding up the tunnel ceiling. They're quite old, aren't they? Lord Marcus frowned. Yes, some of them date back decades. Fascinating, and do you inspect them regularly? Only I couldn't help but notice that one there. I pointed to a beam that looked perfectly fine to me. Appears to have some concerning stress fractures. Several of the guards immediately looked up at the beam I'd indicated, their faces going pale. Apparently, cave-ins were a real concern down here. Perhaps we should continue the tour above ground? I suggested sweetly. Lord Marcus nodded quickly and we made our way back to the surface. As we emerged into daylight, I caught sight of something interesting. A camp of armed men just beyond the tree line, flying banners I didn't recognize. Lord Marcus, Adrian said, following my gaze, those men, are they part of Duke Aldrich's forces? No, Your Highness. They're private security for the mines. Private security that outfits itself better than most royal guards? I observed mildly. How wonderfully efficient. Lord Marcus's smile became strained. Duke Aldrich believes in being prepared. Oh, I'm sure he does, I agreed. Though I wonder what he'd think of this particular preparation. That evening, while the official delegation attended another formal dinner filled with veiled threats and diplomatic doublespeak, I excused myself with a strategic headache and did some reconnaissance of my own. Which is to say, I convinced one of the kitchen maids to let me help serve wine in exchange for gossip about the mysterious armed camp. Oh, those men, she whispered as we filled decanters. They've been here for weeks. Lord Marcus says they're for protection, but protection from what? We've never had trouble before. And what does Duke Aldrich think of them? Duke Aldrich? She looked confused. He doesn't know about them. Lord Marcus said they were a surprise. Extra security for the negotiations. Interesting. Very interesting. I was so busy processing this information that I almost missed the conversation happening in the corridor outside the wine cellar. Tomorrow's demonstration should convince them that negotiation is pointless, a voice was saying. Lord Marcus, I realized. And if it doesn't? Another voice, gravelly and unfamiliar. Then we proceed to the next phase. Make it look like an accident. Mining explosions are common enough. With the Valerian delegation dead, King Edmund will have no choice but to declare war. And Duke Aldrich will be so devastated by the tragic loss of our guest that he'll have to step aside and let someone with a stronger stomach handle the crisis. My blood went cold. They weren't just planning to sabotage the negotiations. They were planning to murder us all and use it as justification for a coup. I had to warn Adrian, now. I slipped out of the kitchen and made my way to the Great Hall, where dinner was still in progress. Adrian caught my eye as I entered, and I gave him the smallest signal possible. A touch to my throat, the gesture we'd agreed meant immediate danger. He was good, I'll give him that. He finished his conversation with Duke Aldrich without missing a beat, then excused himself for some fresh air. I followed a few minutes later. What is it? He asked the moment we were alone on the balcony. I told him everything. The mercenaries, the planned accident, the coup. By the time I finished, his face had gone grim. We have to warn Duke Aldrich, he said. Do we? How do we know he's not in on it? Because, Adrian said slowly, if he were, he wouldn't have served us red wine last night. He'd want us dead, not insulted. I stared at him. That's actually brilliant. I have my moments. He was quiet for a beat. Lyra, what you've done here, discovering this plot, it's going to save thousands of lives. Let's hope so. But first, we have to survive tomorrow's demonstration. Leave that to me, Adrian said, and something in his voice made me believe him. The next morning, Lord Marcus announced a special treat for the delegation, a demonstration of Morwen mining techniques, deep in the tunnels where we'd toured the day before. Duke Aldrich looked as surprised as anyone by this announcement, which confirmed my suspicions about who was really behind the plot. How exciting, Adrian said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Though I confess, I'm curious about those men we saw yesterday, the private security forces. Will they be joining us for this demonstration? Lord Marcus's expression flickered. That won't be necessary, Your Highness. Oh, but I insist, Adrian continued smoothly. As future king, I'm very interested in innovative security measures. In fact, I'd love to meet their commander. Perhaps Duke Aldrich could arrange an introduction? Now Duke Aldrich was frowning. Brother, what security forces? I gave no orders for additional men. The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Marcus opened and closed his mouth like a fish before finally managing, I thought it best to be cautious, brother, with such distinguished guests. Show me, Duke Aldrich said, his voice deadly quiet. Show me these men you hired without my knowledge or consent. What followed was the fastest unraveling of a coup attempt I've ever witnessed. Faced with his brother's fury and the prince's pointed questions, Lord Marcus folded like a house of cards. Within an hour, the mercenaries were arrested, the mining demonstration was canceled, and Lord Marcus was in chains. Your Highness, Duke Aldrich said, as we stood in his private study afterward, I owe you and your delegation an enormous debt. My brother would have murdered you all and used your deaths to justify war with your kingdom. Actually, Adrian said, glancing at me, the credit belongs to Lady Lyra. She's the one who uncovered the plot. Duke Aldrich turned to me with new respect. My lady, how can I ever repay such a service? With peace, I said simply, and maybe a trade agreement that doesn't involve anyone getting murdered. Duke Aldrich laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him since we arrived. I think that can be arranged. 3 days later, we had a treaty that not only prevented war, but established a three-way trade partnership that would benefit everyone involved. More importantly, I had something I'd never expected to find on this trip. Adrian looking at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. You saved us all, he said, as we stood in the palace gardens on our last night in Morwen, the moonlight turning his hair silver. We saved us all, I corrected. I found the problem, but you had the authority to solve it. Still, he stepped closer. Lyra, I have to ask you something. Yes? When we get back to Valeria, would you consider staying at court? As an advisor, officially. My heart did something complicated. Adrian, I know it's not traditional. I know your family has other plans for you, but you're brilliant, and you see things no one else sees, and He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I think I'm falling in love with you. Before I could lose my nerve, I kissed him. Right there in the moonlight, with the scent of foreign flowers around us and the weight of a successful diplomatic mission between us, I kissed the crown prince of Valeria and felt something shift in my chest. When we broke apart, he was smiling. Is that a yes to staying at court? That's a yes to a lot of things, I said, and meant it. Too bad I had no idea what we'd be walking into when we got home. The great hall fell so silent when Adrian made his announcement that I could hear the torch flames flickering in their sconces. One moment, the court was buzzing with curiosity about our successful mission to Morwen. The next, you could have heard a pin drop in the next kingdom. I wish to marry Lady Lyra Ashworth, Adrian repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. With your majesty's permission, of course. King Edmund looked like someone had just told him his son wanted to marry a turnip. My father had gone so pale I was worried he might faint, and Celeste was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder, more calculating. Your Highness, Lord Chancellor Bardolph said carefully, this is unexpected. Lady Celeste is a lovely choice, but perhaps... I said Lady Lyra, Adrian interrupted, not Lady Celeste. The whisper started then, a susurrus of shock and speculation that grew louder by the second. I stood frozen in place, acutely aware that every eye in the hall was on me, judging my worth as a future princess and finding me lacking. Adrian, the king said slowly, might we discuss this privately? Of course, father, but my mind is made up. As the court began to disperse, reluctantly because nobody wanted to miss whatever drama was about to unfold, Celeste appeared at my elbow like a beautiful, vindictive ghost. Sister, she said sweetly, what a surprise. Congratulations. Celeste, Oh, don't apologize. I'm sure you didn't plan this. Her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. After all, you've always been so good at accidentally getting what other people want. That's not fair. Didn't what? Didn't spend weeks alone with the prince while I stayed home learning to be the perfect princess for him? Didn't use your little diplomatic adventure to seduce him away from his actual intended bride? Adrian was never intended for you, I said, my temper finally sparking. That was father's plan, not his. Well, it was my plan, Celeste said, and something in her voice made me look at her more carefully. Did you know, dear sister, that Adrian and I have been corresponding for months? That we've been meeting in secret whenever he visits the city? My stomach dropped. What? Oh, yes. He sought me out after my debut last spring. Said he found me captivating. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. He told me he loved me. He promised to ask father for my hand when he returned from Morwen. You're lying. Am I? She tilted her head, studying my face with scientific interest. Ask him if you'd like. Though I wonder what he'll say when he learns about father's little tax problem. What tax problem? Celeste's smile widened. The one where he's been skimming from the crown levies for the past 3 years. I have documentation, of course, very thorough documentation. It would be such a shame if that information found its way to the king's auditors. The threat was crystal clear: renounce the engagement, or she'd destroy our family. Celeste! Think about it, sister. You have until tomorrow to decide. She patted my arm with false sisterly affection. Choose wisely. That night, I sat in my chambers staring at the engagement ring Adrian had given me. His mother's ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the firelight like captured stars. It was beautiful. It was also apparently meant for my sister. A soft knock interrupted my brooding. Come in. My lady? It was my maid, Mira, carrying a tea service. I thought you might like some chamomile. You look troubled. Just thinking. I accepted the cup gratefully. Mira, can I ask you something? Of course, my lady. Has Lady Celeste been different lately? Acting strangely? Mira set down the teapot with unusual care. My lady, it's not my place to gossip about your sister. But, yes, she's been having a great many private meetings, and she's been asking questions about your schedule, your activities, where you go, who you see. Mira hesitated. She's also been receiving letters, sealed letters that she burns after reading. Letters, like the correspondence she claimed to have with Adrian. Mira, I need you to do something for me. Something that might be dangerous. Her eyes sharpened. Name it, my lady. I need to know who's been writing to my sister, and I need to know what's in those letters she's been burning. Leave it to me, Mira said grimly. Lady Celeste isn't the only one who can be sneaky. The next morning brought disturbing news. Lord Garrett, the diplomat who'd accompanied us to Morwen, had died in his sleep. A weak heart, the physician said. Tragic, but not uncommon in a man of his age. Except Lord Garrett had been in perfect health 3 days ago. It's quite sudden, Adrian said, as we walked in the palace gardens, away from listening ears. He seemed fine when we returned from Morwen. Too fine, I agreed. Adrian, I need to tell you something about Celeste. I told him about our conversation, about her threats and her claims regarding their correspondence. By the time I finished, his face had gone hard. She's lying, he said flatly. Yes, I spoke with her at court functions, but there were no secret meetings, no promises, and certainly no declarations of love. I barely know her. But the letters. What letters? I never wrote to your sister. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Lyra, someone is playing a very dangerous game here. Before I could respond, Mira appeared on the path ahead of us, practically vibrating with excitement. My lady, she said breathlessly, I have news about those letters. What did you find? They weren't from His Highness, she said, shooting Adrian an apologetic look. They were from Lord Marcus. Adrian and I exchanged glances. Lord Marcus, from Morwen, but he's in prison. Not anymore, my lady. He escaped 3 days ago, the same day Lord Garrett died. My blood went cold. Mira, please tell me you didn't take one of the letters before it was burned. I'm afraid I did, my lady. She produced a folded piece of parchment from her sleeve. You might want to read this. Adrian and I huddled over the letter, and with each word, my heart sank further. My darling Celeste, the Valerian delegation has been dealt with, as promised. Your information about their route and schedule was invaluable. Now we move to the final phase. The prince must not be allowed to marry your sister. Too much depends on maintaining the current balance of power. Use whatever means necessary. Your devoted servant, M. She's been working with Marcus all along, I whispered. She's the one who told him about our mission, our plans. She tried to get us killed, Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. And when that failed, she moved to plan B, which is destroying your reputation, threatening your family, and forcing you to step aside so she can take your place. He folded the letter carefully. The question is, what's her plan C? We found out that night. I was getting ready for bed when Mira burst into my chambers, her face white with panic. My lady, don't drink the wine. What wine? I looked around confused, then spotted the cup on my bedside table. That wine? Lady Celeste brought it herself. Said you'd had a difficult day and might need something to help you sleep. Mira grabbed the cup and sniffed it. It smells wrong. Sweet, but with something bitter underneath. Poison. My own sister had tried to poison me. Mira, we need to... The door burst open, and Celeste swept in with several court ladies in tow, their faces already arranged in expressions of shock and grief. Oh, Lyra, she said, her voice breaking with perfectly performed sorrow. I'm so sorry. I know this must be difficult for you. What must be difficult? The illness, darling. Everyone's talking about it. How pale you've become. How you've been having dizzy spells and trouble sleeping. She gestured to the other ladies, who nodded sympathetically. Lady Margaret mentioned she saw you stumbling in the corridors yesterday. Lady Margaret, who was Lord Marcus's cousin and had fled the country with him, but apparently not before setting up this little charade. I feel fine, I said carefully. Oh, but you don't look fine, Celeste continued, her voice full of false concern. In fact, you look quite ill. Perhaps you should drink your medicine. She gestured to the poisoned wine with a smile that made my skin crawl. I think, I said slowly, I'd prefer a different physician. Nonsense. Dr. Aldwin is the best in the kingdom. Another of Marcus's associates, no doubt, and he's already prepared your treatment. The trap was beautifully constructed, I had to admit. Refuse the medicine, and I look paranoid and unstable. Drink it, and I'd either die or become legitimately ill, giving Celeste the perfect excuse to step in as Adrian's replacement bride. You know what? I said brightly, picking up the wine cup. You're absolutely right. I do need something for my health. And before anyone could stop me, I threw the contents directly in Celeste's face. The reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of sputtering indignantly about being doused with wine, Celeste screamed and clawed at her face as whatever poison she'd put in the cup began to burn her skin. Fetch Adrian, I told Mira, as the court ladies rushed to help Celeste. Tell him we have our answer about Plan C. The formal engagement ceremony was supposed to be a celebration. Golden banners hung from the cathedral ceiling. Nobles from across the kingdom had gathered to witness the crown prince choose his bride, and I was wearing a dress that cost more than most people's houses. Too bad someone was actively trying to murder me. You look beautiful, Adrian murmured as we stood at the altar, but his eyes were scanning the crowd, watching for threats. We'd agreed to proceed with the ceremony despite everything, or rather because of everything. Celeste and her conspirators were getting desperate, which made them dangerous but also sloppy. Thank you, I whispered back. Any sign of trouble? Besides your sister glaring at me like she wants to set me on fire? No. I risked a glance at Celeste, who was seated in the front row with a silk scarf artfully arranged to hide the chemical burns on her face. She'd claimed the injuries were from a tragic accident with a lamp, but everyone knew better. The whole court was buzzing with speculation about what had really happened. Dearly beloved, Archbishop Kellum began, his voice echoing through the cathedral. We are gathered here today to witness the betrothal of His Royal Highness Prince Adrian and Lady Lyra Ashworth. The ceremony proceeded smoothly until we reached the traditional sharing of ceremonial wine, a goblet blessed by the Archbishop and passed between the bride and groom as a symbol of their union. I'd been dreading this moment all morning. Archbishop Kellum lifted the golden goblet with solemn ceremony. May this wine represent the joining of two lives, two houses, and two hearts. Adrian took the cup first, raising it in a toast to the assembled nobles before taking a sip. Then he passed it to me with a reassuring smile. The wine smelled fine. It looked fine. But after 3 attempts on my life in as many days, I wasn't taking any chances. To new beginnings, I said loudly, raising the goblet high. Then I pretended to trip. The wine went flying, splashing across the altar steps and soaking into Archbishop Kellum's ceremonial robes. The nobles gasped in horror at the sacrilege, but I was watching Celeste's face and the flash of pure fury that crossed it before she remembered to look sympathetic. Oh no, I said, doing my best impression of a mortified bride. I'm so clumsy. I'm so sorry, Your Grace. Think nothing of it, my dear, the Archbishop said kindly, though he was clearly trying not to wince at his ruined robes. Nerves are perfectly natural. Perhaps, Celeste called out sweetly, we should postpone the ceremony? Poor Lyra has been so unwell lately. I feel fine, I said quickly. Please, Your Grace, can we continue? Of course, though I'm afraid we'll have to proceed without the wine blessing. Actually, Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly through this cathedral, I think we should investigate why my bride suddenly became so clumsy. He gestured to his guards, who immediately moved to secure the spilled wine while everyone watched in growing confusion. Your Highness, Lord Chancellor Bardolph said nervously, surely this is unnecessary. Is it? Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. Because if someone has been attempting to poison my bride during our engagement ceremony, I'd call that treason of the highest order. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Celeste laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that didn't quite hide the edge of hysteria. Poison? Adrian, darling, don't you think you're being a bit paranoid? Poor Lyra is just nervous. Then you won't mind if we test the wine, Adrian said pleasantly. Of course not, but really... Adrian signaled to one of his guards, who produced a small cage containing a white mouse. Palace mouse tasters were a grim necessity when dealing with potential poisoners, and this little guy was about to earn his keep. A few drops of the spilled wine were carefully collected and fed to the mouse. Within seconds, the poor creature was convulsing. Within a minute, it was dead. The cathedral erupted in chaos. Nobles were shouting, guards were drawing swords, and Archbishop Kellum was backing away from the altar as if the very stones were cursed. Seize Lady Celeste, Adrian commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. This is ridiculous. Celeste stood, her face flushed with anger and, apparently, terror. I had nothing to do with this. Anyone could have poisoned that wine. You're right, Adrian agreed. Anyone could have. But only someone with access to the cathedral preparation chambers could have switched the ceremonial wine without being seen. Only someone familiar with palace protocols would know exactly when and how the wine blessing occurs, and only someone with a very specific motive would want my bride dead on our engagement day. Celeste's composure finally cracked. You think you're so clever, don't you? Both of you, with your little diplomatic triumph and your perfect romance. But you have no idea what you've destroyed. Enlighten us, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. House Ashworth was supposed to rise through me. I was supposed to be queen. I spent years preparing, years perfecting myself, years falling in love with a man who barely knew I existed. Her voice rose to a shriek. And then you with your books and your foreign languages and your complete inability to be a proper lady, you waltzed in and stole everything that should have been mine. Adrian was never yours to steal, I said quietly. He would have been. If you hadn't seduced him with your little diplomatic games, if you hadn't made him think he needed some brilliant advisor instead of a beautiful wife. Celeste's perfect composure was completely gone now, replaced by raw, ugly fury. Do you know what I've sacrificed for you? What I've done? Tell us, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. Lord Marcus promised me everything. A crown, a kingdom, revenge on everyone who overlooked me for my plain, bookish sister. She laughed bitterly. All I had to do was provide information about your little diplomatic mission. Make sure it failed. Make sure you came home with nothing but defeat and humiliation. And when that didn't work? When that didn't work, we adapted. Marcus escaped, came here, helped me plan something more. Permanent. Her eyes glittered with malice. Father's tax records were just the beginning. I have documentation of every shady deal, every corner he's cut, every law he's bent to keep this family afloat. One word from me and House Ashworth falls completely. So you decided to murder me instead, I said. I decided to remove an obstacle. You were never supposed to matter, Lyra. You were never supposed to be anything more than a footnote in my story. Her voice broke on the last word. And now look at you, standing there in my dress, wearing my ring, stealing my life. Your dress. I looked down at the gorgeous blue silk I was wearing. Celeste, this dress was made for me. Made from the fabric I chose, with the design I approved, everything about this ceremony was planned for me. She whirled to face Adrian. You wrote to me. You told me you loved me. I never, Adrian started. Show him the letters. Celeste screamed at someone in the crowd. Show him. But of course, no one moved. Because the letters had been from Marcus, not Adrian. Because the whole romance had been an elaborate fantasy constructed to manipulate a lonely, ambitious girl into betraying her own kingdom. The realization seemed to hit Celeste all at once. Her face went white, then red, then white again, as the full scope of her delusion became clear. He played me, she whispered. Marcus, he played me. Yes, I said gently. He did. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the dead mouse on the altar steps and the burning sensation when that poisoned wine had touched her face. Take her away, Adrian commanded. Lady Celeste Ashworth, you're under arrest for high treason, attempted murder, and conspiracy against the crown. As the guards moved forward, Celeste looked at me one last time. You think you've won, she said quietly, but you have no idea what's coming. Father's sins don't disappear just because I'm gone. And Marcus has plans you can't even imagine. What plans? Adrian demanded. But Celeste just smiled, a cold, empty expression that made my skin crawl. Ask your bride about her legitimacy, Your Highness. Ask her about her real father. Then the guards were dragging her away, and I was left standing at the altar in a poisoned cathedral, wearing a blood-stained dress, with those final words echoing in my ears like a curse. The revelation came 3 days later, delivered by a messenger who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. My lord, the young man said, bowing nervously to my father, I bring word from the capital investigators about the irregularities in your tax records. We were gathered in Father's study, Adrian, myself, my parents, and Lord Chancellor Bardolph, who'd insisted on being present for any discussions involving potential treason charges. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. What irregularities? Father asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. The missing levies from the past 3 years, my lord, and the creative accounting regarding grain shipments and trade tariffs. The messenger swallowed hard. I'm afraid the evidence is quite comprehensive. Father's face went gray. How comprehensive? Complete records, my lord. Documentation of every transaction, every falsified report, every crown tax that was redirected to House Ashworth's coffers. The messenger glanced nervously at Adrian. Lady Celeste was very thorough in her record-keeping. That treacherous little, Mother started, was trying to protect this family, Father interrupted wearily, in her own twisted way. Protect us? I stared at him in disbelief. She tried to murder me. She tried to secure our future, and when that failed, she tried to ensure our survival. Father slumped in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The tax situation? It's bad, Lyra. Worse than you know. How bad? Bad enough that without those redirected funds, House Ashworth would have collapsed 2 years ago. Bad enough that the king has every right to strip us of our lands, our titles, and our lives. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Adrian spoke. What's the total amount? 40,000 gold crowns, the messenger said quietly, plus penalties and interest. I felt sick. That was more money than most noble houses saw in a decade. However, the messenger continued, His Majesty has asked me to convey that he's willing to consider alternative arrangements, given Lady Lyra's recent service to the crown. What kind of arrangements? Adrian asked sharply. Full repayment over 10 years, with House Ashworth placed under crown supervision. No additional penalties, no loss of titles or lands. The messenger hesitated. The offer is contingent on Lady Lyra's marriage to your highness proceeding as planned. In other words, the king was willing to overlook my father's crimes as long as I married his son and brought my diplomatic skills into the royal family. It was politics at its most cynical and most practical. And if we refuse? I asked. Then House Ashworth is dissolved, its assets seized, and Lord Ashworth faces charges of high treason. The messenger's voice was apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, my lady, but those are the terms. After the messenger left, we sat in stunned silence. Finally, Mother spoke. Well, at least we know where we stand. Do we? I turned to Adrian. Because I have to ask, is this why you want to marry me? Because your father ordered it? What? No. Adrian looked genuinely shocked. Lyra, I proposed to you before any of this came to light, before I knew anything about your family's financial situation. But now that I do know, I love you even more for keeping your integrity despite everything. He reached for my hand. Your father made mistakes, yes. But you didn't know about them, and you certainly didn't benefit from them. Didn't I? All those books I bought, all those tutors who taught me languages and history and diplomacy, where do you think the money came from? From a father who wanted to give his daughter every opportunity to succeed, Adrian said firmly. The methods were wrong, but the motivation wasn't. Adrian's right, Father said quietly. Everything I did to secure a future for you girls. I wanted you to have choices, opportunities, a chance to rise above the circumstances of your birth. Speaking of the circumstances of my birth, I said, remembering Celeste's parting shot, there's something else we need to discuss. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lyra, Mother started. No, I need to know. Celeste said something about my legitimacy, about my real father. What did she mean? My parents exchanged a look that confirmed my worst fears. Tell me, I said. Your mother had an affair, Father said bluntly. 16 years ago with a Morwen diplomat. You're not my biological daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, all of it was a lie. That's why Celeste hated me, I whispered. She knew. She found out 3 years ago, Mother said, tears streaming down her face. She was looking through my old letters and found correspondence from your real father. Who is he? Duke Aldrich's younger brother, the legitimate one, not Marcus. Father's voice was carefully neutral. A scholar and diplomat named Lord Emmerich. He was part of a trade delegation, and your mother and I were going through a difficult period. Does he know? No. And he can never know. Lyra, if this information becomes public, it won't just destroy House Ashworth. It could destabilize relations with Morwen entirely. Father leaned forward, his eyes intense. Celeste used this knowledge to manipulate Marcus, to convince him that you were some kind of spy or double agent. It's part of why he was so eager to eliminate you. So I'm not just illegitimate, I said slowly. I'm potentially treasonous. The daughter of a foreign nobleman, raised in the Valerian court, now engaged to the crown prince. I laughed bitterly. No wonder Celeste thought she could destroy me with this information. Can she? Adrian asked quietly. If it becomes public knowledge? Probably. I looked at him, my heart breaking. Adrian, you need to end our engagement, now, before this destroys your family too. Like hell I do. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He stood and began pacing. I understand that you're the most brilliant, brave, honorable person I've ever met. I understand that you saved my life and prevented a war through your intelligence and courage. I understand that I love you, regardless of who your biological father is. But the political implications are manageable, Adrian said firmly. Your parentage is a private family matter unless someone chooses to make it public. And the only person who knew about it besides your parents was Celeste, who is now in prison for treason. And Marcus, who is a wanted fugitive with no credibility. Adrian stopped pacing and looked at me. Lyra, we can handle this, together. Can we? Because I'm starting to think Celeste was right about one thing. I was never supposed to matter. I was never supposed to be in this position. Maybe it's time I stepped aside and let someone more suitable take my place. More suitable? Adrian's voice was dangerous. Like who? Some empty-headed court lady who can curtsy perfectly but can't tell the difference between a trade agreement and a dinner menu? Some political pawn who'll smile and nod and never challenge anyone or anything? Someone legitimate. Someone whose marriage won't cause a scandal. Someone boring, Adrian said flatly. Someone who won't save kingdoms or expose treasonous plots or challenge me to be better than I am? He crossed the room and took my hands in his. Lyra, I don't want suitable. I want you. Illegitimate, politically complicated, absolutely brilliant you. Even if it costs you the throne? It won't come to that. But if it did? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. The same smile that had made me fall in love with him in the moonlit gardens of Morwen. Then we'll find another kingdom to save, he said, together. The news came at dawn, delivered by a royal messenger whose horse was lathered with sweat and whose face was grim with exhaustion. Your Highness, the man gasped, falling to one knee before Adrian. I bring urgent word from the capital roads. Lord and Lady Ashworth, there's been an accident. My blood turned to ice. What kind of accident? A carriage crash, my lady, on the mountain pass near Raven's Hollow. Their vehicle went off the road during the night. The messenger's voice was carefully neutral. There were no survivors. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. No survivors. My parents were dead. How? Adrian's voice was sharp. Lord Ashworth is an experienced traveler, and that road is well maintained. The investigation is ongoing, Your Highness, but it appears the carriage wheel may have been compromised. Sabotage. Someone had murdered my parents and made it look like an accident. Who knew they were traveling that route? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The travel plans were filed with the royal office, my lady. Standard procedure for noble households. The messenger hesitated. However, it seems the documents may have been accessed by unauthorized parties. Marcus, I whispered. Most likely, my lady. He and several associates remain at large, and there have been reports of suspicious activity along the trade routes. I sank into a chair, the full weight of what had happened crashing over me. My parents were dead, murdered by the same man who'd tried to kill me, who'd manipulated my sister, who'd nearly started a war between two kingdoms, and now I was alone. Lyra, Adrian's voice seemed to come from very far away. I'm so sorry. They were trying to flee, I said numbly. They knew the investigation was closing in, knew they'd be arrested for treason, so they ran, and Marcus killed them for it. We don't know that. Yes, we do. I looked up at him, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest. He killed them to send a message. To me, to you, to anyone who thinks they can oppose him and live. Then we'll find him. We'll bring him to justice. Will we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's winning. I stood, my legs feeling unsteady. My parents are dead, my sister is in prison, my house is disgraced, and I'm the bastard daughter of a foreign nobleman. Exactly what kind of justice do you think we're going to find? Lyra, I need some air, I said, cutting him off. I need to think. I walked out into the palace gardens, where just days ago Adrian had told me he loved me, and I'd felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Now the same flowers seemed to mock me with their beauty, their simple certainty of purpose. Mira found me there an hour later, sitting by the fountain where I'd first realized I was falling for a prince. "My lady," she said gently, "I've brought tea." "Thank you." I accepted the cup gratefully, warming my hands on the porcelain. "Mira, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you stay? After everything that's happened, all the danger and scandal and death, why are you still here?" Mira was quiet for a moment. "Because you matter, my lady." "Do I? Sometimes I think Celeste was right. I was never supposed to be important. I was just the spare daughter who accidentally stumbled into a life that was meant for someone else. With respect, my lady, that's horseshit." I blinked in surprise. Mira never swore. "You think this is all an accident?" she continued, her voice passionate. "You think it's coincidence that you're the one who learned languages and studied diplomacy and understood foreign politics? You think it's chance that you saw through Marcus's plot when no one else did? I think I was lucky. You think you were prepared. By your parents, yes, but also by yourself. You chose to learn those things, to develop those skills, to become someone who could save kingdoms when the time came." Mira sat beside me on the stone bench. "Your sister spent years preparing to be a princess. You spent years preparing to be a leader. There's a difference. A leader with no followers, no family, and no legitimate claim to anything. A leader with a prince who loves her, a kingdom that owes her their peace, and the respect of foreign courts who've seen what she can accomplish." Mira's voice softened. "My lady, I've served in noble houses my entire life. I've seen a dozen beautiful princesses and a handful of brilliant diplomats. But I've never seen anyone quite like you." "Like what?" "Someone who saves people without expecting anything in return. Someone who sees problems and solves them instead of complaining about them. Someone who puts the good of the kingdom before their own comfort." She smiled. "That's not luck, my lady. That's character." Before I could respond, Adrian appeared on the garden path, his expression serious. "Lyra, we need to talk. There's been a development." "What kind of development?" "The kind that changes everything," he said grimly. "Marcus has made contact. He wants to negotiate." The letter was waiting in my chambers when we returned from the gardens, placed on my writing desk with the casual arrogance of someone who could come and go from the royal palace without being detected. "Lady Lyra, by now you will have learned of your parents' unfortunate accident. Please accept my condolences on your loss, though I confess I take some satisfaction in the irony. They died fleeing justice, just as they lived avoiding it. I write to propose a simple exchange. Your life for Celeste's freedom. Meet me at the ruins of Ashworth Keep at midnight tomorrow, alone and unarmed. Come, and I will ensure your sister is released and your remaining family name is cleared of all charges. Refuse, and I will ensure that every kingdom from here to the Eastern Sea knows exactly who your real father is and what that means for Valerian security. You have 24 hours to decide. Your humble servant, Lord Marcus." "He's insane if he thinks I'm walking into that trap," Adrian said after reading the letter for the third time. "Is he?" I set down my teacup and looked at him. "Because from a strategic standpoint, it's actually quite clever." "Clever? He's asking you to commit suicide. He's asking me to trade my life for my sister's freedom and my family's reputation. And the terrible thing is, it might actually be worth it." Adrian stared at me in horror. "Lyra, no. We'll find another way." "What other way?" "Celeste is facing execution for treason. My family name is ruined. And if Marcus makes good on his threat about my parentage, it won't just destroy me, it'll destroy you too." I stood and began pacing. "At least this way, something good comes out of my death." "Nothing good comes out of your death," Adrian said fiercely. "And I won't let you sacrifice yourself for people who tried to kill you. Celeste is still my sister." "Celeste is a traitor who poisoned your wine and tried to murder you in a cathedral. She doesn't deserve your sacrifice." "Maybe not. But our kingdom deserves peace and your crown deserves protection from scandal." I stopped pacing and looked at him. "Adrian, what happens if Marcus follows through on his threat? What happens when foreign courts learn that the crown prince's bride is the illegitimate daughter of a Morwen lord? We deal with it. How? By going to war to prove your loyalty? By executing me for treason to prove your patriotism? By annulling our engagement and watching House Ashworth fall into complete disgrace? I shook my head. This is the cleanest solution. This is the coward's solution, Adrian snapped. And you're not a coward. No, I'm a realist, and realistically, my death solves more problems than my life. Not for me. The raw pain in his voice stopped my pacing. I turned to look at him and saw something that made my heart clench. Genuine desperation. Adrian, I love you, he said simply. Not your title, not your political value, not your diplomatic skills, you. The woman who argues with me about trade agreements and corrects my pronunciation of foreign phrases and makes me want to be a better king than my father ever was. He crossed the room and took my hands. If you die, I lose the only person who's ever made me feel like I could actually do this job. You'll find someone else. I won't. There is no one else like you, Lyra. There never will be. His grip tightened. So if you're determined to meet Marcus tomorrow night, you won't be going alone. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. For you, yes. For both of us together, we have a chance. I stared at him. You're serious? Completely. We go together, we face whatever trap he's set together, and we come out of it together. Adrian's smile was grim but determined. After all, we make a pretty good team. We could both die. We could both live. And more importantly, we could end this threat once and for all. He was quiet for a moment. Lyra, I need to tell you something about the investigation into your parents' death. What about it? They weren't running away when they died, they were coming back. I blinked in confusion. What do you mean? The carriage was traveling toward the capital, not away from it. Your father had sent word that he wanted to confess everything, to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for leniency. Adrian's voice was gentle. They were coming home to face the consequences of their actions. The news hit me like a physical blow. My parents hadn't died as cowards fleeing justice. They died as people trying to do the right thing, finally, even though it was too late. Marcus killed them to prevent their testimony, I whispered. Exactly, which means he's getting desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. Or they become more dangerous. Both, Adrian admitted. But Lyra, we can't let him win. Not after everything we've been through, everything we've built together. He cupped my face in his hands. Your parents died, trying to choose courage over cowardice. Don't dishonor their memory by making the opposite choice. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of decisions settling on my shoulders. When I opened them again, my mind was clear. All right, I said. We do this together, but if we're walking into a trap, we're going to be smart about it. What do you have in mind? Remember what we learned in Morwen? Sometimes the best way to win a game is to change the rules entirely. Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm listening. Ashworth Keep had been abandoned for 3 generations, ever since my great-grandfather decided that living in a drafty castle on a windswept hill was considerably less comfortable than a modern manor house in the valley. Now its crumbling towers and overgrown courtyard provided the perfect setting for what was either going to be a dramatic confrontation or a very scenic double murder. Are you sure about this plan? Adrian asked as we approached the ruins under cover of darkness. Absolutely not, I replied cheerfully, but it's the best terrible idea we've got. Our plan, such as it was, relied on 3 key assumptions. First, that Marcus would bring Celeste as promised. Second, that he would expect us to come alone and unprepared. And third, that his arrogance would make him overconfident enough to make a mistake. If any of those assumptions proved wrong, we were probably about to die in a very romantic and very stupid way. There, Adrian whispered, pointing to a flicker of torchlight in the keep's main hall. Movement. Remember, let him talk. Villains love to explain their clever plans, and the more he talks, the more likely he is to reveal something useful. And if he just tries to kill us immediately? Then we improvise. We made our way through the ruined gatehouse and into the main courtyard, our footsteps echoing off the ancient stones. The torchlight was coming from what had once been the Great Hall, though now it was mostly just 4 walls and some very determined ivy. Punctual, a voice called out as we entered. I appreciate that in a person. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, still wearing the fine clothes that marked him as nobility, despite his current fugitive status. He looked older than when I'd last seen him in Morwen, his face gaunt and his eyes holding the desperate glitter of a man who knew he was running out of options. Where's Celeste? I demanded. Safe for now. He gestured to a figure bound and gagged in the corner, my sister, very much alive but very clearly not happy about her current situation. Though I confess, she's been less than grateful for my rescue efforts. Probably because you're the reason she's in this mess to begin with, Adrian said coldly. Am I? I rather thought that honor belonged to your charming bride-to-be. Marcus's smile was all teeth. Though I suppose we all played our parts in this little drama. What do you want? I asked. Justice, revenge, the satisfaction of watching the world burn since I can't seem to rule it. Marcus shrugged. Simple pleasures, really. You want to kill me? Oh, my dear girl, I want to do so much more than that. His eyes glittered with malice. Do you know what I've learned during my weeks as a fugitive? The most fascinating stories about your family. About you specifically. Such as the fact that you're not actually a member of House Ashworth at all. You're a bastard, the illegitimate daughter of a Morwen nobleman. Marcus began circling us slowly like a predator stalking prey, which makes your engagement to the crown prince rather problematic. Ancient history, Adrian said dismissively. Is it? Because I've taken the liberty of sending letters to several foreign courts detailing your bride's true parentage and its implications for Valerian security? Marcus smiled. By now, half the continent knows that their future queen is the daughter of their enemies. Former enemies, I corrected. We have a peace treaty, remember? For now. But treaties can be broken so easily when trust is compromised. He stopped circling and faced us directly. Tell me, Your Highness, how long do you think your father's carefully constructed alliances will last when your allies learn that you've been compromised by foreign blood? About as long as it takes me to explain that my bride's parentage has nothing to do with her loyalty, Adrian replied calmly. Loyalty? Marcus laughed. She's a spy, Your Highness. Planted in your court as a child, raised to become your perfect diplomat, positioned to influence your policies in Morwen's favor. It's rather brilliant, actually. It's rather insane, actually, I shot back. I was 3 years old when my mother's affair ended. Exactly what kind of long-term espionage were you imagining a toddler could accomplish? The kind that results in a suspiciously favorable peace treaty with the kingdom of your birth father, Marcus said smoothly. The kind that places a Morwen bastard in line to become Queen of Valeria. I prevented a war between our kingdoms. Did you? Or did you simply ensure that when conflict came, Valeria would be too compromised to resist effectively? Marcus's voice took on the tone of a teacher instructing a slow student. After all, what better way to conquer a kingdom than to place your own blood on its throne? The accusation was so absurd that for a moment I was actually speechless. Then Adrian laughed, a genuine amused sound that echoed off the ruined walls. You know what, Marcus? You're absolutely right. Lyra is definitely a foreign spy. That's why she exposed your coup attempt instead of supporting it. That's why she helped me negotiate a treaty that benefits both kingdoms equally instead of favoring Morwen. That's why she risked her life to prevent a war that would have devastated both our peoples. His voice turned mocking. Clearly, she's a master manipulator playing a game so complex that her actions look exactly like those of a loyal Valerian citizen. Mock me all you like, Your Highness, but the damage is done. Your bride's reputation is ruined, your engagement is a political impossibility, and your kingdom's security is compromised. Marcus pulled out a wicked-looking dagger. Now, shall we proceed to the final act of this little drama? Actually, I said, I think we're ready for the intermission. I raised my hand and gave a sharp whistle, the signal we'd arranged with the dozen royal guards currently surrounding the ruins. Within seconds, the great hall was full of armed men, all of them pointing crossbows at Marcus with professional efficiency. You see, Adrian said conversationally, we did come alone. Technically, the guards just happened to be in the neighborhood. Marcus's face went white, then red with fury. You treacherous. Careful, I interrupted. You're about to call a foreign spy treacherous, which seems a bit hypocritical. This doesn't change anything, Marcus snarled. The letters have been sent. The damage is done. Your precious reputation is ruined regardless. About those letters, Adrian said, pulling a familiar piece of parchment from his jacket. You mean these letters? Marcus stared at the documents in growing horror. How did you intercept your correspondence? Well, it turns out that when you're a wanted fugitive, people are quite willing to cooperate with royal investigations, especially when they're offered immunity in exchange for information. Adrian smiled pleasantly. We've had your location tracked for days. We've been reading your mail, monitoring your contacts, and generally making sure that none of your little schemes actually succeeded. Impossible. Improbable, I corrected. But not impossible when you have the resources of two kingdoms working together. Which, by the way, is exactly what you'd expect from a peace treaty that actually benefits everyone involved. The fight went out of Marcus all at once, leaving him looking like what he really was. A bitter, broken man who'd gambled everything on revenge and lost. Take him away, Adrian commanded the guards, and untie Lady Celeste carefully. As the guards moved to comply, Celeste was freed from her bonds and the gag removed from her mouth. She looked around at the armed men, at Marcus being led away in chains, at Adrian and me standing together unharmed, and her expression was unreadable. Sister, she said finally, Celeste, I suppose I should thank you for saving me. You should thank Adrian. It was his idea to stage this whole confrontation instead of just arresting Marcus quietly. Why? Celeste looked genuinely confused. Why save me after everything I did? I was quiet for a moment, thinking about my parents' final journey home, about the courage it took to face consequences instead of running from them, about the difference between justice and revenge. Because, I said finally, someone once told me that mercy is what separates leaders from tyrants. And I'm hoping that maybe, given time and a chance to reflect, you might remember that we used to be sisters before we became enemies. Celeste stared at me for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. For all of it, I'm so sorry. I know, I said. So am I. 2 months later, I stood in the same cathedral where someone had tried to poison me on my engagement day, wearing a different dress and a clearer conscience. Celeste was in exile, voluntary exile, in a convent where she could find peace and perhaps redemption. Marcus was in prison, facing trial for treason and murder, and I was about to become a princess. You know, Adrian murmured as Archbishop Kellum began the wedding ceremony, this whole experience has taught me something important about marriage. What's that? It's not about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone you want to solve problems with for the rest of your life. I smiled. Good thing we have plenty of problems to solve. Good thing indeed, he agreed, and kissed me as the bells of the cathedral rang out across the kingdom, announcing the beginning of a new reign and a new age. They used to call me the spare daughter, the one who didn't matter. But it turns out that sometimes being the spare means you're exactly where you need to be when everything falls apart. Sometimes the person no one expects to matter is the only one who can hold everything together. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to rewrite your own story with a better ending than anyone thought possible, including yourself.